This podcast is brought to you by Deepbridge Capital LLP. Deepbridge is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Please note that investments discussed are both illiquid and high risk and won't be suitable for all investors and should be considered as part of a diversified portfolio. The content of this podcast should not be construed as financial or taxation advice. We recommend investors seek appropriate professional financial advice. Any views expressed may no longer be current and may have already been acted upon. Welcome to this latest Deepbridge Discovery Podcast. My name's Andrew Aldridge. The purpose of these podcasts is to bring to life the people and the companies behind what Deepbridge Capital does. To that end, today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Steve Bloor, who is CEO of life sciences company Videregen, a company within the Deepbridge Life Sciences EIS portfolio. So Steve, great to see you. Thank you for joining us. Can we start at the beginning and can you start by telling us a bit about Videregen, how it came to be and key objectives of the organisation?
Yeah, no, good to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So Videregen really is, at the point that it became to be is really the end of one journey and the start of the next. So I'd always worked in what's now called tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. Mm-hmm. Those phrases weren't coined at the time. And working on tissue-derived therapeutics, usually medical devices, so things like hernia repair, soft tissue repair, cosmetic surgery type things in big companies like Johnson & Johnson and other small spin-outs in the UK as well. And the company I was working for were acquired by Vidergen Medtronic. I stayed there as VP of the biological sciences section, but it became kind of clear that they weren't interested really in taking the technology forward that we developed in this previous smaller company, which is around tissue repair. And at that time, which was around 2008 to 2010, cell therapies were kind of becoming a bit more fashionable. They could reach clinical trial. And so we had the idea, and it wasn't just our idea, but people around the world would think about how can you combine tissue-derived products with cell therapies, not just as a way of taking cell therapies into the body, but to be more functional. So can you recreate an organ from scratch? And that's really where we started. And so I left Vidergen as soon as I was able to from the retention that I had there, and founded Videregen with the thought of let's combine some technology from one of the research institutes we used to work with, who developed some organ regeneration technologies, and try and spin that into what became Videregen. So I did that in 2011, probably slightly too early. It then took another 2 to 3 years to get funded. So in that meanwhile, I kind of funded myself through working as a consultant, actually back to Vidergen and to a few other kind of medical device companies that I knew of. And then we became funded in 2014 through a combination of angel investors, which then helped us secure an Innovate UK grant. And our objectives at the time were really that was to take forward some tissue engineering technology to try and replace and regenerate organs and tissues. And at that time, it was around gastrointestinal, so bowel reconstruction, and trachea reconstruction. Trachea is still where we're working now in one way or another. So that's a long-winded way of kind of the derivation of Videregen.
So it kind of came about as an idea you had, which had some research behind it, but also some kind of, if you like, hot trends in the industry, kind of cell therapies, etc. And it was kind of that combination bringing the three together, I guess.
It was, there were hot trends, and there was a big push for regenerative medicine, even though it was more in academia than industry at the time. Certainly, it's still not in big pharma. But it always been an ambition of mine to go back into a small company, and the only way I could see about realizing that at the time was actually to create a small company myself. And take the technology forward. And I always thought the technology had a lot more legs, so I was disappointed when Vidergen didn't want to take it forward. And so I felt that it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity that if I didn't take, I would regret.
And was there rationale that it was just too early in terms of a concept and to take it forward? Was that their kind of rationale to not want to do it?
Well, companies like Vidergen used to be Tyco, and those kind of companies in the US. They're really about growing the businesses they have. They're very risk averse in taking new technologies out. They want to acquire technologies that are proven and then build on those. So it was really, really too early for them. As much as it it made sense, and all the internal metrics they had at the time, and there were thousands of them, to kind of help fund a new project, even though they all worked out very well. It was just, they had no business unit where it would fit.
Yep. And I guess we've seen that in the UK with the the big pharma companies, etc. Kind of over the last 20 years, moving from R&D into acquisitory kind of mode. I guess is that kind of fair across the board? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are Dr. Steve Bloor, I should say. What was your PhD in, Steve?
So my background is in cell biology, biochemistry. So I did a degree in applied biology, and then wondered what I was going to do with that. And even before that, I wanted to be an electrician. I didn't want to be a biologist or scientist at all. But for some strange, unbeknown reason to myself, I kind of completely messed up the apprenticeship entrance exam at Vauxhall Motors in Ellesmere at the time, actually. And just because I wanted to hang around at school with my mates and play rugby at the school, I just stayed on, did A-levels, and that really kind of led me to here. And then I did a PhD. I worked for a while, for a year, in the northeast in kind of fermenter design, because I like the engineering aspects of that.
Okay.
And then decided, actually, I do like research. I do like working in a lab, so found a PhD to do, which is over in Preston in the University of Lancaster. And that was in collaboration with Glaxo at the time.
Okay.
And that really set me into kind of the thought process of, I like the research. I don't like being in academia, so I want to be in industry.
Yep.
And so straight from there, I joined a small startup in Scotland, which actually was in kind of tissue regeneration, but using small molecules. So that really started me on a pathway to, beyond.
Gave you that kind of concept of the market and what you wanted to do, and great. No, I mean, your background of having that academic experience, but alongside, a proven track record of building businesses is I'd say probably relatively unique in the market, which is great, and I guess exactly what Videregen needs as an organisation, which is great from our perspective, because we often talk to investors, etc., about that importance of the team that we're investing in. So when we look at companies, having that team that has either been there and done it, or is kind of collaboratively minded to bring in commercial expertise where it's needed. So I know when we first kind of met you guys, it was your that expertise and that experience was vitally important, which is great. So kind of on the journey of Videregen State, what have been your key milestones today?
There's probably quite a few, but pulling it down to maybe 3 or 4. First was getting funded.
Yep.
Was persuading people who would like to invest that the technology, although very early, had some potential. So that was useful. And that then unlocked grant applications for us. And I have to say, and we can talk about this, I guess, later maybe, we've been very successful with grants, but Innovate UK are designed and set up to hopefully support high-risk, high-reward technologies like ours. Yep. So that's helped us. In terms of actually kind of operational or company milestones, probably the biggest is receiving approval for clinical trial, for our clinical trial for our what used to be our trachea product, which is we've now repurposed or refocused into a product for treating bronchopleural fistula, which is another airway disease, but it's slightly less aggressive and less risky than a trachea replacement. Okay. And that was with the Royal Papworth Hospital. So we were really pleased that is a milestone to attract the Royal Papworth Hospital, who are a world-renowned cardiothoracic centre, to work with us, and then to get the approval from MHRA and ethics to start that clinical trial. Unfortunately, that milestone is still waiting to be completed because COVID came along and stopped us entering clinic at that particular point.
Which has been a big challenge for all kind of organisations in your space, I guess, kind of over the last couple of years. But you mentioned before kind of that initial investment you got from angel investors and enabled you to then go and get Innovate UK funding. How did you get those angel investors originally? Was it just kind of through local networks or individual personal networks, or how did you get those first people to come and kind of back you?
Well, so I'm based in the north, kind of in Leeds, and so the angel networks in the north aren't, at least in our experience, that extensive or strong, for at least in our area, our technology sector. So we used the London Business Angels Network, And so we worked with them. We then presented at a couple of their networking events in London. Managed to attract a lead investor who then became a board member, Dr. Robert Hollenby, who was actually an ex-surgeon. I think that helped because he understood exactly what we were trying to achieve. So he became lead investor and then attracted a small group of others that give us the momentum then to attract the grant.
Yep, brilliant. Excellent. You mentioned obviously trachea, etc. Kind of leads us on to, we always like to talk about challenges that businesses face as well. So do you want to tell us a little bit more kind of about some of the key challenges you faced as an organisation?
Well, the trachea was a key challenge. We did receive clinical trial approval to do a clinical trial on tracheal replacement, and that was with University College London Hospital. But I don't know if people will remember when they watch this, the kind of a scenario about probably longer than that ago, probably 2015, 16 time. There was a surgeon in Italy, or from Italy, who did some really aggressive and unethical surgeries in tracheal placement area. Nothing like our technology. We had no association with him at all, but it just made the whole environment on that particular area very toxic. So we could have pressed on. We had approval to do that, and MHRA was supportive of where we were, but we just think, given the environment around, particularly Europe, US was not such a concern, but Europe in particular, that it was probably high risk for us to kind of carry on, because clinical trials are risky things anyway. Things go wrong, and because we got the smallest thing could have got blown out of proportion. Really, just the opportunity that the company had could be lost. So we pivoted at that point to use the same product, but in a different indication, in a slightly different way, which is, again, a life-threatening indication, high quality of life kind of impact on these patients, but less risky from a technology perspective, less risky from a surgery perspective. So that was a big challenge. And then COVID was obviously a huge challenge. Everyone probably mentions COVID. It's unfortunate for us because we submitted for a clinical trial approval in January of 2020, and by May we had all of the MHRA and ethics approvals to start a clinical trial. And unfortunately, our clinical trial is in respiratory patients, and the Royal Papworth is a national referral centre for serious respiratory patients. So they were full very quickly with some very, very sick people that were transferred from around the country. And we essentially locked out of the clinical environment for 2 years. So that was the biggest challenge, and that then has knock-on effects of how do you then keep funded over that period? How do you reignite the project when eventually all things happen? As it happened, we had a very strong relationship with Papworth and with our other partners there, and we still have regular project meetings, even though we couldn't do anything, just to keep in touch. And that relationship's endured, and we still have a very strong partnership there. And we're hopeful that at some point we can find a way forward to reactivate that project.
That kind of relationship must not only be very kind of comforting, I guess, during a period like that, but also hugely valuable to you as an organisation to have that kind of that close-knit relationship with an organisation like Papworth.
It's great. It gave us a great insight into their challenges through the whole kind of pandemic. I think the project was a slight release for them because it was something different to think about when they could get their head out of the theatres and various things. So it was comfort for us because there's nothing we could do. It was a hugely frustrating time. That there were some things that broke during COVID that we then had to fix that gave us some purpose. That needed doing. But knowing that the project team was still there and all the key clinicians were still interested and although not active, were still waiting for the time when they could rejoin the party.
Yeah, I think there was not a misconception, but certainly we had conversations with people during the COVID period when people were saying to us, your life sciences companies, this must be kind of positive for them, and that must be a sector which is flying kind of during that period. But I don't think people understood that you couldn't get into hospitals, you couldn't do clinical trials, even if some of our companies that we've invested in elsewhere, that even if they're wanting to get into hospitals to roll out training or to roll out new products, etc. Even if they'd got approval, they still couldn't go into hospitals to go and do that training with nurses, with doctors, etc. So that almost kind of been a 2-year hiatus, possibly even more for some organisations because of COVID, because the healthcare systems were locked down, and even in the short term, people even in R&D stage couldn't get into labs to go and do their research, etc. So it was a big impact on kind of the industry as a whole.
It was indeed, and it wasn't just from the hospital's perspective, particularly places like Papworth. It wasn't just that they had lots of COVID patients there. Is that a lot of those major hospitals also did clinical trials for the NIHR, essentially for government, to trial COVID therapies. So they were busy treating patients, but also overwhelmed trying to find the next new therapy for COVID.
Yeah, I can imagine. So kind of when you started out, you mentioned Innovate UK, etc. There's so much support for early stage businesses in the UK. In your sector, did you find that? What was the ecosystem like, and what's it been like on your journey to date? Kind of support from entities, whether that be grant agencies such as Innovate UK or any other parties that you've been working with.
Well, Innovate UK deserve a special mention for us because we've been very successful and I guess lucky because it is a competitive process. We have some good projects at the right time with the right grants there, and that's helped us a number of times that we've received grants for them. There are some other sectors areas that are, I suppose, government funded, like the setup at Daresbury and some of the kind of more local areas that are very good at certain stages. We've probably got past some of those stages now. And certainly from a funding perspective, it gets harder and harder because we're at the clinical stage in that kind of valley of death that kind of gets described, where a lot of professional investors or VC groups that we talk to that ought to be interested and are interested, but then they mostly say, really understand, and this is probably a universal commentary we get back. We really understand what you're trying to do. We like what you're trying to do, but no one's done it before. Come and have a chat to us when you've got some clinical data. But we're looking for funding to do clinical data. So It's like hugely frustrating from that point of view. And that Deepbridge was different from that perspective. That's been fantastic for us.
I think that partly comes down to our team here at Deepbridge kind of understand the process you have to go through and understand, whether it be Savas, Ben, etc. They've seen organisations, worked with organisations that have been through that process and understand that actually this is the real opportunity for investors, if you like, because as you said, once you get through clinical trials, if everything goes as it should, then there should be a number of other funding options that can do Series A, Series B rounds and take you forward. But for us, certainly this is where there's significant opportunities in the market just by understanding how an organisation like yourself works and the steps it needs to go through.
Yeah, no, exactly, and it's arguable, well, I would argue anyway, that companies like us and technologies that are cutting edge, if you like, that the first clinical data you get is probably the most important piece of data you'll ever get, because that's a huge inflection point for the promise and de-risking, but also potential valuations and future fundraising. So that's been a slight disappointing with some of the other VCs that we talked to. They don't necessarily understand that position. Going back to what the ecosystem, I guess the part of the ecosystem that is changing very slowly, particularly outside of the Golden Triangle, is access to facilities. That's always been my big bugbear for the last 15 years, really, is in the north of England in particular, around the key cities where the good universities like Leeds and Manchester and Liverpool and Newcastle, only now you're starting to get good bioscience laboratories and facilities that can house companies like Vidergen. And beyond that, GMP capability as well, which still doesn't really exist in great quantities in the north. So we've ended up having to do GMP type manufactured work in the south and have laboratories in the south when we didn't really want them there. Because it splits the company kind of momentum away from where we want to be. That's changing, and where we are now in Leeds, in the Nexus building as part of the University of Leeds. They've invested in a building which is for companies like ourselves, obviously trying to create spin-outs from the university, but anyone can join, and we've got a great laboratory setup. There's great shared facilities here, and we need more of that around the hubs in the north.
And I guess that's all part of that ecosystem, which is vital for you to have the space to be able to do what you need to do in special resources that you require.
Exactly, yeah. And being close to the university means we have access to university expertise, university equipment. So, we've never, from when we started the company, we never wanted to invest in facilities because it's just, if we can rent them or use facilities elsewhere, the equipment, until we get to a stage where we need facilities, it's kind of a waste of investors' money for us to plough that into bricks and mortar.
It'd be more of a vanity project than anything, I guess. But working close to university, and like you said, you've got the access to skills and things which maybe internally you don't have, which is phenomenal. You kind of mentioned that kind of when Videregen was starting out, and you're talking about cell therapies and things like that, etc. How was that world, the regenerative medicine world, and kind of transplants, etc. How has that world changed over since kind of Videregen was kind of inceptualized, if you like?
It's changed hugely. So the kind of regenerative medicine sector kind of, I guess, is predominantly cell and gene therapies, and tissue engineering is really the very, very young brother or sister to that family. Sure. And the cell and gene therapy world has grown hugely. So there are quite a few cell therapies out there now licensed that work very well, and gene therapies as well. And there's huge amounts of money invested into those types of, perceived like sexy technologies, even at a hugely early stage. And that's slightly frustrating because the tissue engineering side of the regenerative medicine is probably less well funded.
Yep.
And that's probably because from a big pharma perspective, you tend to buy and bankroll some of these cell and gene therapy assets. Can see an easy way they can fit those things into their kind of sales bag.
Yeah, makes sense.
Whereas tissue engineering it's a surgeon-led, it will always be, I think, a surgeon-led kind of prescription or buy for the NHS or for healthcare organisations. So it's probably going to be organisations that are dual, like Johnson & Johnson, who have pharma and medical device and Medtronic and all those kind of, all the big kind of conglomerate type organizations who will eventually kind of take the lead on these types of things. But the technology, the area has grown a lot. There are other companies working in similar sectors to us now who are making good headroads. So we're no longer, while we're kind of alone in our particular indications that we're targeting, we're not alone in the tissue engineering space. And there are other companies who are targeting different areas and getting good clinical and preclinical data. So it all helps drive things forward.
Yeah, it builds the confidence in the market, I guess. People understanding the market better. It's just bringing that kind of that critical mass, I guess, to it. Yeah. So what are the next steps then for Videregen? What are you working on at the moment? What's your next steps? You mentioned like Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, people like that. Are those the kind of organisation that ultimately would be an exit opportunity for Videregen? Am I putting words in your mouth there? What's next, I guess, is the short question.
Yeah, so we've been working more recently, and actually Deepbridge have helped us with this with funding on a bioengineered thymus project, which is probably the most exciting asset we've had. And are likely to ever have, because the implication is huge for lots of different diseases. And this really will re-engineer the immune system for people who have a faulty or defective immune system. So the initial indication there would be for children who were born without a thymus, who have no immune system at all and will die.
Yep.
And they get currently a thymus transplant, which works in about 3/4, but not all of the patients. So we're working with Great Ormond Street Hospital to take that to clinical trial, hopefully in the next 3 to 4 years, and that'll be a game changer for that population of patients. But more expansively, the technology there has implication in autoimmune diseases, so potentially to reverse or reduce the effects of like type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, with transplant tolerance. All of our thymuses, when we get to my kind of age in mid-50s, your thymus is really active when you're born, and then it deteriorates over life.
Okay.
So your immune system becomes less able, and this was seen during COVID. People with poor immune systems suffered poorly, literally. And your immune health is really important for a healthy, not I'm going to say longevity. I don't mean living to 150. I mean for living a healthy life with few diseases. So there's impacts there. Now, we wouldn't be the company that takes that on because that's a future aspiration. But in terms of who would be interested in Videren's technology, I think it's probably, you can always roll out the J&Js as well, the Medtronics and the big pharma companies, but I think it's more likely to be a mid-range regenerative medicine company in the UK, Europe, or US, likely because they're where the bigger are. And there are literally hundreds of them around who are capitalised at the kind of valuation that would be interested in technologies like ours. So we've always been focused not on a timescale of when we can exit. It's about building the technology and the structure around that, because we realise that whoever eventually acquires that technology won't have our expertise. And they'll want that expertise. They'll want the structures we built around it, the teams and the collaborators, to segue into their organisation so they can learn and grow with that. So we've always been trying to do things organically on the knowledge that when we get to the right data point, that'll be the point where we can start advertising, if you like, and promoting the technology for, as a potential acquisition.
And as you alluded to earlier, data is the key. That is where you get the valuation inflection points. That's what effectively people want to see, and that's ultimately what you're driving. Is again, we often talk how kind of a life sciences company differs from a standard kind of B2C tech company that we might also invest in with one of our other funds. And one of the key things there is actually understanding what the value driver is. If it's excuse me, if it's a B2C app, for example, it's probably about users, it's probably about revenue driven kind of metrics, etc. But with you, it's all about the data. That is, I guess, your key asset that you are building, and that's what people are effectively investing in is the data.
Precisely. It's the data and the science that we generate that creates the story as well. Because a lot of these things are new, and having a product that cures a disease is hugely valuable, but having the science to explain it, so you can have the publications and the marketing collateral and to tell the story because as always with these new technologies, you will always get the pioneer clinicians who want to use the newest thing. Those guys are great in promoting the technology, but the people you really have to persuade is the average surgeon who just wants to do something good for the patient and is not really kind of engaged in all the high-flying conferences and those things. And they're the people who will eventually kind of roll these things out to larger numbers.
And that's when it becomes the norm, I guess, and that's the big one. So, we've talked through kind of where you've been, where you're going, etc. If you were speaking to an entrepreneur in your sector kind of today, who was thinking about doing something similar, or who's got that great idea and wants to drive it forward, what would be your advice to entrepreneurs, particularly in the life sciences sector where you operate?
Well, there's probably a few things to say. So one is make sure you've got solid IP and get a good patent attorney to make sure that you've at least got a solid ground there. I know a lot of the IP in early stages is unexamined, so it always becomes how good is it really until it gets examined around the world. Find some key clinicians and supporters who you can work with. There's nothing better when you're in a meeting with an investor or someone from marketing in a company to kind of talk about clinicians and surgeons about how much they like the technology, because at the end of the day, that's what gets you in places. And try and build a team around you, and they're not always an employee team, because you can't always afford to do that, but a team of either collaborators through grants or consultants, rather than employing people if you need to. And recognise that while you might be the person who's starting the company or is trying to pioneer the technology, you're not an expert in everything, and you can't be. And so find the best and the brightest people you can do, and try and persuade them to join you. Because there's nothing better than have a team of highly proficient and intelligent people working with you, even if you're the dumbest person in the room. Because as long as they're bought into the vision that you have, then everyone's pulling in the same direction. So it's difficult to do, because where do you start with all those things as a newcomer? And I guess I had the advantage that I've been around that cycle a few times when we started Videregen, so it was relatively easy. Someone completely brand new is try make sure your IP is good, try and build a team, and then try and look for investment, because the team helps you get the investment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I once had a boss who echoed your sentiment. His motto was, when recruiting, was that he always made sure that he was the dumbest person in the room. He did say he made an exception when he recruited me, but that's a different story. But no, great. So as part of these podcasts, we want to kind of bring to life the people behind the organisations as well. So kind of away from it's not a 9-to-5 job when you're running a growth scale up business. What do you, when you can find time, what do you do away from work, and what are your interests?
So I suppose predominantly I like walking. So where we live in North Leeds is right on the edge of the countryside. So
Brilliant.
literally out of our front door and across the fields. We've got New Yorkshire Dales and Derbyshire Dales, not within an hour where we are. So walking is a
beautiful,
actually a big thing of ours around anywhere around the country, really. Around home, I'm a practical person, so I like doing things. Not necessarily decorating, that has to be done, but I like building things. So
that's your engineering background.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I'm a frustrated engineer. I think I really am. So I built a pizza oven 2 or 3 years ago, because I'd always wanted to build a dome out of stone or bricks, and that was how could I do that practically? So I built an oven to do that.
Awesome.
So practical things, really. So walking, practical. We like traveling. That usually involves kind of traveling to somewhere so we can go and walk in a different country and climb it.
Brilliant.
And as usual, most people kind of trying to keep it with all of your friends. Inevitably, they're around the country, so it's traveling to meet people.
Yeah, very good, very good. And then the question that we ask everybody on the podcast is about the Deepbridge dinner party. This is the bit that everyone hates. Everyone says it's the most difficult question to answer, which is kind of quite nice, because we like to take people out of their comfort zone. But if you could invite 3 guests, dead or alive, no friends or family, because we don't want to upset anybody who you don't invite, but who would you invite to the Deepbridge dinner party?
Yeah, it is a difficult question, because it could go on forever, really, when you start thinking about who would like to meet that you've never met before. So I think two sports people. One is Ian Botham.
Yep.
Because when I was growing up and into cricket, he, along with a lot of his colleagues at the time, but him in particular was a big hero of mine.
Yep.
And still remember all the kind of 1981 Ashes series and the heroics there. That was just fantastic, and he was larger than life. He seems that way. I never met him, but he seems that kind of person. So it'd be nice to kind of spend some time and be with him. Another one is the sporting one, because I'm from the Northwest. I've always been a Liverpool fan. And again, from the same time period when I used to go to Anfield to watch Liverpool most weeks, it'd be great to meet Kenny Dalglish.
Yep.
And spend some time with him. And he always seemed like a great guy, and obviously post Hillsborough and all those things, you kind of really see more of a personal side about him. So he genuinely seems like a really
to his own personal detriment there as well.
Yes, exactly.
Which is obviously why we kind of resigned not long after. But
yeah. And then one from history, and this was a difficult one, because there's probably quite a few people who consider kind of would be like to meet Elvis or those people. But one of the people in history that I think will be interesting to me, although I have no idea how we kind of get on with him, is Sir Isaac Newton.
Okay, yeah.
Not necessarily because of his physics thing, because I think I imagine that he'd be just way too smart to talk to in a sensible kind of way. But I just like the way he not only into physics but into alchemy, all those kind of natural science things, and then became. I'm not sure if he was the first governor of the Bank of England, but certainly he was the master of the mint, and brought in the gold standard that lasted right way through to the 1970s. Yep. And chased around the country in disguise, chasing down counterfeiters who were counterfeiting gold things. So I think he's just an interesting kind of person to maybe observe, if not kind of meet in that kind of way, because again, language would be difficult. 17th century English, and
you could teach him more about cell therapies and things like that. Which,
what the future was like. Yeah, he probably had a book somewhere on cell therapies that published, I imagine.
Yeah, brilliant. No, really interesting. I think they'd be great for the dinner party. Certainly an interesting combination. So yeah, that's great. Steve, thank you very much for your time. That was brilliant to catch up with you, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
That was great. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. If you have any topics you'd like covering in future podcasts, please email us at discovery@deepbridgecapital.com. This podcast was brought to you by Deepbridge Capital LLP. Deepbridge is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Please note that investments discussed are both illiquid and high risk and won't be suitable for all investors and should be considered as part of a diversified portfolio. The content of this podcast should not be construed as financial or taxation advice. We recommend investors seek appropriate professional financial advice. Any views expressed may no longer be current and may have already been acted upon.